Hello, everybody, and welcome back from lunch. Thanks for joining our fourth session of the 2024 Government and Public Sector Virtual Conference. My name is Christian Fieldgraf, and I'm a partner at Cherry Beckert, and I'm the leader of our government and public sector industry. The session today is, I think it's really fascinating. It's one of those things that, unfortunately, we do find some different areas of fraud, waste, and abuse in government, and we are becoming known as a firm that will run into the fire and very astutely help you and help your governments as you go through some of these issues and do it discreetly and professionally. The session today is going to include a discussion about identifying, documenting, quantifying fraud, waste, and abuse in government entities. We hope you're planning to join us for the remainder of the day, along with our 5 webinars tomorrow. And now, I know there's a lot of content, and I'd like to turn it over to our speakers today, Lori Smith and John Collier.
Thanks, Christian. Appreciate it. And thank you everyone for being here. We're glad to be here, both John and myself. As Christian said, we're here to talk about in this session the procurement and expense reimbursement fraud risk and methods to prevent them. A little administrative feedback that you've already had in order to obtain your CPE credits. Please don't forget to answer the polling questions, and you'll get your certificate within the next 10 days. First, a little introduction about ourselves. I'm Lori Smith. I'm one of the partners in the Forensic and Dispute Advisory Services with Cherry Beckert, as well as my colleague, John Collier, who's a managing director in our group as well. A little bit of background on what our Forensic Dispute Advisory Service practice is about is we bring together many aspects of accounting, consulting, and forensics experience to provide the expert insight and clarity required to meet the challenges of litigation with confidence. We provide a wealth of services, but some of the services a little more specific in the governmental public sector that we offer include quantification of lost revenues and profits, fraud detection and recovery and prosecution, abuse and misuse, data analytics, as well as exploration of loss quantification and whistleblower investigations. So that's just a breadth of our experience in our forensic and dispute advisory services that we do offer, especially to the governmental public sector. Oftentimes we're contacted after the fact, after an event has occurred. It may be that expenses go up more than they have been in the past, so there looks to be something going on there. It could be that there won't be funds and that are there to meet the budget, what was in the budget, and so just something appears unusual. We're called in there to ask for assistance with these as these issues arise, both to identify and quantify them as it goes on. As far as John and myself, both of us have many, many years of experience. For me, over 20 years, and John over 30 years in the forensic and dispute advisory services space, both with expert testimony in many of the courts, both state and federal across the U.S. Any more comments, John, before I get moving?
No, I think we're ready to roll.
Great. First, we'll start off with a polling question before we get started on the content. So our first polling question is, according to PwC's Global Economic Crime Survey of 2024, how does procurement fraud rank in terms of economic crime disruption to companies? The choices are A first, B second, C third, D fourth, and E 10th. You could answer the polling question. I'd appreciate it. So it looks like the results are in. Looks like second took top, but in actuality, it is the third most top disruptive economic crime in the procurement fraud. So again, it is in the top 3, according to the latest survey in 2024. So our discussion today is going to talk about these topics as you see here: common procurement fraud schemes, the internal controls for preventing procurement fraud, employee expense reimbursement fraud, the internal controls for preventing employee expense reimbursement fraud, and we'll give you a case example or two. So let's get started in the first topic, which is common procurement fraud schemes that we have seen. We'll go into each of these in details, but includes bid rigging, kickbacks, conflicts of interest, fictitious vendors, phishing emails, cost shifting and cross-charging, and product or service substitutions. Many of these may seem a little familiar to you, but we'll go into each of them a little further in detail. So first, we'll get started on bid rigging. As the name says, bid rigging is it's a legal practice and involves manipulating of the bidding process in some form or fashion to ensure that the company is awarded the business. There are many types of bid rigging, and bid rigging can lead to cost taxpayers millions of dollars because a lot of collusion can lead to higher prices and limited competition. So it can be quite costly if there is bid rigging. Some of the types of bid rigging include complementary bid rigging. This is where you'll see that sometimes someone will submit a bid that is intentionally high. That way, the determined company that will win the contract appears to be a little low of a bidder. Bid rotation. This is where the companies work together and that they're taking turns submitting the winning bid. So it looks like there's competition, but in reality, they're working together and rotating, submitting the bids to ensure that they are going to win the bid. Bid suppression. This is kind of the opposite. The competitors work together and agree not to submit bids, reducing the number of bidders. Thus, in turn, it increases the winning bidder, the predetermined winning bidder to win that bid. We'll also see market diversion and allocation. This is where they collude amongst themselves to not bid against each other and agree to submit bids for certain parts or certain contracts and not bid on others. So, and again, in bid rigging, oftentimes and most times they're working together. The competitors are working together as well. We often see to look at bid rigging, we often see look for patterns. Are they the third or fourth vendor winning the bid? Often there's many ways you can look for patterns. Use of data analytics. Data analytics is widely used now as well. You can put your vendors and all the related information into data analytics to look for some of these bidding patterns and analyze them. You can look at if they're winning, the volume of the awards they're winning, how often they're winning the bids. Is it unusual patterns, or are the bids very close in amount? Is one really too high? Are they using round numbers? Are the winning margins, what are the identical winning margins or the percentages there? Are they similar? So those are just some different ways to use data analytics to see if there may be some bid rigging going on in the process. Some of the signs of bid rigging, just like I mentioned, identical bids from different vendors. So again, they're working together behind the scenes for the bid, thus it looks very similar, just different vendors. Personal relationships. Is it that there's a significant other of the person responsible for the bidding process that is going to be going to be bidding for this respective vendor and chosen? So there, relationships there. Is the winner bidding subcontracting to the losing bidder? So again, the vendors are working together, and yet whoever wins it works with that losing bidders. Often in bid rigging, you'll see a lot of last minute changes to the contracts. It could be that they put in there's something overly restrictive in the contract. So that way, one person in particular can only win that respective bid. So those are just some of the signs that we see in the bid rigging process that you may come across or to pay attention to. As we move on, we'll go to our next polling question. This is, what is the scenario an example of? Several companies agree to take turns submitting the lowest bid for a project, with the understanding that the company whose turn it is will be awarded the contract. The answers is A, complementary bidding, next bid rotation, market diversion and allocation, or bid suppression. Give you a few moments to go ahead and answer that question, and don't forget to put any questions you may have as we go through this seminar. Any questions in the Q&A, we'll be happy to answer them. And bid rotation is 73%, and that is the correct answer. So yep, bid rotation is where the company takes the turn of submitting the lowest bid for a project with the understanding that the company whose turn it is will be awarded. So thank you for your answers. Most 73% got it right. So moving on to the next form of fraud that we see, or other ways they may participate, is kickbacks. A lot of times we'll see with kickbacks, there's a bribery in place. Usually that can be in the form of payment, or it can be in form of gifts. It can be non-monetary. It can be food. It can be meals. It can be tickets to events that are paid in order to bribe to win the respective bid. It can be gift cards, many forms. It can be vacations. It can be trips. So a negotiated bribery does not have to just be that in the form of payment. It can be other means of non-monetary means. A kickback can also be where contractor or subcontractor misrepresents the cost of performing work by secretly paying a fee for being awarded the contract. And what this does, it inflates the job cost to the government. So that's just another form of kickback besides it being a bribery, that it can be monetary or non-monetary. Some of the forms of signs of kickback that we see and that you may see as well include employees maintaining standard of living beyond their income. Someone may be paid $30,000, but in all other aspects of life, without other source of income, they're driving a Mercedes and living in a $2 million house. Again, that's a little exaggerated, but again, just not another sign that they may be maintaining a standard of living beyond what their income is, and they have no other means for that income. Continue to award subcontractors with poor performance records. So again, the contractor that may not be the best in performance is still continually being awarded the contractor, the subcontractor is. You may see unapproved charges on the contract for goods and services. Goods or services are greater than the contracted amount. So it may be the award may be not to the lowest bidder many times. So these are just signs that we see of certain kickbacks to pay attention to. The next is conflicts of interest. And this is conflict of interest is just what it says is a person for which has an economic benefit and is in an influential role. The person may be, an employee or agent, and they have an interest in this role. Oftentimes we see it within the government purchasing employees, may be related to those contractors who award the government contract. Or it may be that the employees or families have an ownership interest with that supplier or contractor who award the government contract. Something we've seen before is the head of procurement has a spouse who owns a business who may be trying to bid or provide the supplies and equipments for that related contract. So again, where employee or family member has an interest in the company that is bidding. So those are signs we see. Where a person has power and they use that power to their control, and they have access to the confidential information to gain, a step ahead to release that information to the public. As you probably have seen, there's sometimes in the political realm, we'll see that there's laws that are changing because someone may be privy and access to information, and it may be passed on to their significant others who are then using it to their advantage. So be cautious of that side, but that's another sign, is that position of power will definitely be a conflict of interest if they're using it to that extent. If the purchasing employee fails to file the conflict of interest or the financial disclosure questionnaires, again, other signs there may be a conflict of interest if they're not wanting to fill out those respective forms and submit them because there's concern or caution there. One of the next times, fictitious vendors. This is where we see an employee creates a false company or a shell company, and false invoices are sent in order to direct payments to themselves or related party. We may also see that payments are made without supporting invoices. So to make sure that there's supporting invoices with each respective payment. We often see too, if their invoices are created in Word or Excel, they're easy to manipulate. without a predetermined, another software program that you're using to create these invoices. It's easy to change within Excel or Word a few different things, which can include where the payment needs to be mailed, the vendor's address, things to that extent. So what software is being utilized to create these respective invoices can be assigned. If they're using photocopies invoices rather than originals, if they're, be caution of the vendor addresses. Sometimes it comes to our attention if you're contracting with a vendor and your respective, who has an office in your respective state down the street, and that's their only office, yet the address may be in another state farther away. Or especially pay attention to if there includes PO boxes rather than physical address. Where's that PO box? That's how, if they have access to Excel or Word, it can be directed to a PO box rather than the actual vendor's address. If they're not on the approval vendor list, another red flag of potentially a fictitious vendor. So these are just some of the ways to look for signs of fictitious vendors. We'll move on to our next polling question. Question number 3. The creation of a fake company and false invoices is an example of A, conflict of interest, B, kickback, C, bid rigging, and D, fictitious vendor. Fictitious vendor looks like 94%. I guess I didn't put you all to sleep. 94% answered the question right. So it is fictitious vendor. Appreciate that. Now I'm going to turn it over to John and let him take it from here on some of the other topics we have to discuss.
Super. Well, thank you, Lori, and thank you all for your attention. I've got a couple of additional potential procurement fraud issues to discuss. And just to make sure you all are aware, there are ones beyond the scope of this presentation. Procurement fraud can be a pretty complex type of fraud to uncover, especially if there is collusion, which we will get into a little bit further into the presentation. But let's start with phishing emails. And so, the thing that I want to overlay here before I even get started with this is AI. So AI is not in here. We didn't really have enough time to even discuss the impact of artificial intelligence on phishing. Your mother now can call your brother and get your brother to send her $50,000, and your mother never do the talking. And that's because artificial intelligence is beginning to amass volumes of information, including people's voices, in order to duplicate that and trick people into doing things. And that's the highest technological form now of what used to be just old phishing emails. So that term may be outdated, but if you think at it from the current highest level of artificial intelligence, all this stuff applies. So the definition, you can read on the screen, but a technique used to acquire sensitive data or cause an action to be taken through a fraudulent solicitation in an email in which the perpetrator masks as a legitimate business or reputable person. So the real issue here with phishing is there's any kind of information or action that they are trying to get a government employee or a business person, anyone in an accounts payable department or any other department where there's confidential information that will be beneficial to them. So they're either looking for the employee to convince them to make a wire transfer to their account instead of the correct account. They're looking for confidential information that they can then use to steal someone's identity, or they're looking to get inside information on a company that they can then use in some manner to further themselves. And some of this can take the form of blackmail. If they get information from an employee that employee wasn't supposed to give, now they've got that person on the hook. And so phishing it can really have a damaging effect to a business, to the employee it happens to, because some of these things are so sophisticated, it's really challenging to catch. And unfortunately, we've been on the other side of that many times, where we've had to interview employees who were the victim of phishing emails or texts, and they wound up costing their companies a whole lot of money, and it was definitely without their intention. So some of the signs of phishing that either you as a governmental employee or you as a manager or leader of people can have your people look out for are listed here. So misspellings in email body and or email address. So what's happening there? Lots of phishing happens from overseas and internationally. And a lot of the international phishing scams, they don't spend a lot of time with the particulars of how something's spelled, how many spaces are between words. They're more interested in getting it out in mass because it's a numbers game. 98% of people are going to delete it anyway. They just need 2 or 3% for it to become, a very profitable endeavor. So they quickly put these emails together without giving the time that you or I normally would in putting together an official business-related email. Generic greeting, same thing. They're trying to reach the masses. So they're not going to address the recipient by name. They just want to get as many emails out there as possible. So that's another red flag. Suspicious links or unexpected attachments. Well, that's what you would expect. They're not going to send you an email and ask you to do something without giving you the vehicle with which to do it. And those links are going to be, one of two things. It's either going to take you down a path where you are answering questions and doing things that continue to convince you to eventually provide them with confidential information, a social security number, a password, something of that nature. And so they can do that, or you open up the link and then they will, as you are already aware, insert malware or something else on your computer that then allows them to later, months later, years later, at any time they want to, trigger an operation that can capture your company's data, cause wire transfers, or any other thing that can be detrimental to your company's business. So how do you understand whether or not that's occurring? And we'll discuss this a little bit later, but you can look at the link and the URL that's underneath the link to understand whether or not it's, when you click that button, whether it's going to where the emailer is saying it's taking you to, or whether or not it's taking you to an inappropriate location, or whether or not it's attached to an executable file. And executable files are ones that would install something on your workstation. Now, I say that and with the disclaimer that I'm an accountant and not an IT expert. So, but generally, that's how that would work. So the last thing I'd like to draw your attention to is normally the fraudsters work on your sense of panic or your sense of, if I don't do this now, I'm going to get in trouble. And so what happens is they say, we need you to change your password right away or you won't be able to get in. Or we need you to send this money right now, or your mother's not going to be able to have the surgery that she has to have right now because she just went to the hospital. Any number of things. Anytime that happens, it's really important that you train your employees and for yourselves that if there's a link attached or there's an urgent call to action, it's the time for you to calm down and not do anything and start reading and looking and assuming something's wrong and not opening the attachment, forwarding that email to your IT security department. So Laura, you want to go on to the next slide? All right, so we have a few examples of some incidents of phishing. Some of them actually occurred in things that we identified in prior cases, and some of them we've just, we've made up based on understandings of events that have happened in other company circumstances. But for this example one, you have a company payables department. They maintain a vendor email repository where vendors can submit invoices or they make corporate address requests, change requests, or payment address change requests. This is very typical, especially in big companies. Accounts payable people come in every day and they check an email repository, and all of their vendors have that email address. And instead of trying to get somebody on the phone, they simply send the change information into that email repository and an accounts payable person handles it. But what is appropriate is for that accounts payable person, and we're sticking with procurement fraud here, but there's other areas too. So that's why I'm saying payables. Your accounts payable employee, the first thing they should do if they get the request is read it. Do you need to change? Are they asking for a change of a company address, a change of a payment remittance address, or a change of a wire transfer ACH remittance advice? And most governments pay electronically, so most of it's going to be an ACH. If that's the case, stop, and you need to go onto the internet and go independently verify the name of the person that is sending that request. And then you need to, on the internet, at the company's website or through some other means other than the email, find the contact information for that person or that department that's requesting the change and call them. What phishing fraudsters are depending on is you following instructions in the email. And some of those instructions can look like they're there to verify. Please call me at this number to confirm. Please email this person to confirm. And so the person that is initiating the action is trying to gain trust of the person that they want to conduct it. So they put things in there to make them think that they're doing the right thing by calling this number to confirm it. But they're just calling the person that wants their money. So that's why they need to go out and do an independent, tiny investigation into each email and say, is this person really legitimate? Is this request legitimate? In this case, the payables employees, they were trained to verify changes in requests by using an independent email search. So they had the right training, but a phishing fraudster intercepted an email exchange, an active email exchange between a company payables employee and a legitimate vendor who was requesting payment, and they were going through the process over a series of email communications. A phishing fraudster had been monitoring this website for a long time, interjected themselves into the email conversation, and requested a change in the ACH payment. Since the employee had been talking with this person electronically all day, they didn't think anything of it. They said, no problem. They went in, made the change, and then someone else, independent of them, sent the wire, and that's the way it's supposed to be. We'll talk about separation of duties later, sent the wire and sent $100,000 to a fraudster that they then did not get back. And this was actually one that occurred, unfortunately. So we want to go on to the next example, Lori. So example 2, email verifications to update passwords from the IT department. So I think if you're working at a business, working in a government entity, and you have email, you've gotten these emails. And they say, this is from your IT department. We have had a hack. They usually say, we've had something go wrong. So now your antennas are up. And then they say, we immediately need you, for security purposes, to go in and change your password. Well, this is the opposite of security. They're giving you a sense of concern and a sense of responsibility to the company to go take an action that's going to give them exactly what they need. Because as soon as you click on the link that they have sent for you to do that, because they're never going to ask you to do what you would do anyway, which is simply go change your password through the system that was provided to you by your own internet service group within your company. They're going to have you click on the link, and that's just not typical. And again, you can go and hover over that link with your mouse without actually clicking, and you'll see the URL that they're trying to get you to go to. And every single time, it's going to be something else, because IT departments don't email people and say they need to change their passwords, because all IT departments are aware of this phishing scheme and know that that would not be a reliable way to communicate with employees. And again, urgency, threat. So please change your password now. We've been hacked. You get the poor grammar and punctuation as seen in the email. This is the same sort of thing if this happens to come from overseas. That it's the international phishing where you get most of the spelling and grammatical stuff. If you hover, again, just recapping here, if you hover over the link without clicking, you can see the URL that you would go to if you had clicked the link. And that URL will very typically be something outside of your organization. So for the third one, and we get this all the time, the government apparently either owes me a lot of money all the time, or I'm supposed to get a big refund all the time. I get these in text messages and voicemails. And so they just say, please call us back. And what they're doing, if they're doing that, is they're going to call you, you're going to call them back, and you're going to give them your information, and slowly they're going to take you through a lead of questions that eventually will have you worn down enough when they ask for your social security number that you slip up and give it to them. And that's what they're really looking for. So you need to be careful of these because, and for everybody in your organization and yourselves should be aware the government just does not communicate in that sort of way. They send letters. That's the way the IRS works. They do not email, they don't text, and they don't call you. If there's a link, again, hover over it and take a look. And for all of these things, once your employees or yourselves get these kind of things, you need to forward that to your IT security department. And the reason is twofold. One, you may know, okay, this is fraud. I don't need to worry about this. I'm going to delete this, or I'm going to put it in a different folder. But if you're not alerting the IT security department and your fellow employees are also being hammered by these things, one of them may accidentally fall victim to it. So that person could get terminated and the company could lose a lot of money. Your business, the government sector that you're working for could lose a lot of money. So you're actually helping out your other employees by alerting the IT department because they're gonna send an email out saying to be on the lookout for these sorts of things. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so next is cost shifting or cross-charging. So now we're getting out of the email and correspondence world and back into kind of the world that Lori was discussing of actual physical documents and invoicing and things like that. So basically, cross-shifting or cost-shifting or cross-charging is your historical bait and switch. You buy this, and I'm going to give you that. I'm going to take this and I'm going to charge it over here. And there's a few different ways to do it. First one is cross-shifting. The next one is product substitution. So cost shifting occurs when a government contractor deletes one or more costs that are approved under one contract and then adds it to another without approval. And we use the word contract here, but they're really not doing it under the contract. What they're doing it in is in the invoice. So if you have a vendor and he is fortunate enough to have two contracts with the same government entity, and he had to bid on both of them, or she had to bid on both of them, and they're both being performed. And one of them, that vendor knows they're going to exceed the budget on this contract, and yet on this other one, they are well under budget. And the government may actually have the opportunity to save some money on this one where they're under budget. And the vendor knows he cannot exceed this governmental budgeted contract amount. So he gets a cost in there, and they may say, you know what? The easiest thing to do is let's not put that charge on this invoice under this contract number. Let's take this charge and actually put it on an invoice that has another contract number associated with it. Nobody's going to know the difference. Well, that happens all the time. It's their ability to play a shell game. You said I said I sold you this over here, but I'm really going to sell you this on a whole nother contract so that you can't control your budgets and your costs. So what are the signs of some of that? Well, you've got approved contract charges that are not on the invoice that you would have expected. So you need to have your people or yourselves, y'all need to closely analyze your invoices versus your contract. Have those contracts out. An invoice comes in and says, what's the expectations or what am I supposed to get versus what I got? And if what you bid for isn't on this invoice, but you have received it, then maybe it's on another invoice for another contract. Or it could be at a different amount. It could be at a smaller amount. And trust me, vendors don't want to save you any money. They're looking for all they can get. So if they're charging you less than the contracted amount for a particular good or service, it may be because they're putting the excess on a different contract so that the contract that they're supposed to bid it on stays under budget. Conversely, if you're looking at a contract where people have shifted costs to, then what you're going to find is there's unapproved costs on here. And so you're comparing your invoice to your contract and you're seeing that they're charging you for things you didn't buy. Well, that's probably because you bought it under a different contract. Additionally, you might find that things that you did buy, they're charging you more than they had intended to and more that was in the contract. Well, that's probably because they didn't have the budget to put it in the initial contract. So the first warning sign is you've got one vendor, multiple contracts. If you have that, the vendor's probably fine, probably very honest, and probably will be great the whole time. But at least you understand now you've got the opportunity for a vendor to do something because you've got them doing two contracts at one time. So under those circumstances, you need to be a little bit more alert. What are a couple of other issues? Vendors are typically, especially governmental vendors, they're usually large enough that they're very professional in their invoicing manner. So if you get somebody with a lot of invoice corrections, errors, you get them on the phone and they say they were wrong with the amount or wrong with the price, and it happens maybe once, that might be one thing. But if you're seeing it happen on multiple instances, you probably have somebody that's manipulating the amounts that are on those invoices. And then finally, and this is mainly for consulting services, if you're buying professional services from a firm, then you need to make sure that the people that were listed on the contract that were going to be performing the services, or at least the title and level of that person, that's the level and title of person and the number of hours that were expected, that those are what are on the invoice. If you get that name or that title on a different invoice for a different contract, that's somebody trying to slip Jim's overtime and the extra hours that he took working on this project that we're not going to be able to bill for, and putting them on a contract that they can. So that's a little bit about cost shifting and cross charging. Product or services substitution. That's another bait and switch. So here, I'm going to sell you a Maserati for $2 million. But what shows up in the lot is a Kia. And, if you don't have somebody checking the box to make sure the box contains a Maserati, well, you just got a Kia for the cost of a Maserati. And so what that technically is contractors delivering goods to the government of inferior quality or that don't confirm with contract requirements without informing the government. Sometimes you have to make replacements. Parts are not available. We all went through COVID where there were shipping and supply issues, and adjustments had to be made. But contractors can make product substitutions so that they can increase their margin, because if they have gotten your entity to purchase a higher quality, more expensive product, and they can go and buy a less expensive product to resell to you for that price, that's going to increase their profit margin. So, what's the signs of product or service substitution? Well, you pay for garbage, they deliver garbage and it's not going to work. So a high percentage of the product that the government receives, which a lot of times they order in bulk, a high percentage of them aren't compliant. They don't work. If it's a piece of equipment that fits onto another one and they order 1,000, well, if you've got one that doesn't screw in right, that may be one thing. If you have 50, well, then you may have a situation where the contractor tried to put in an inferior product to the one that you ordered. Another telltale sign is financial pressure to pay in advance. It's very typical of vendors to offer net 30 terms, and it's net 15 or 30. So it's if you pay within 15 days, you get a 5% discount, but the invoice is due after 30 days at the full amount. Well, that's not unusual, and you'll see that consistently in certain vendors. But if you have a vendor that is providing you product and says, look, I'm delivering this today, and if you can cut me a check today, I'll give you 10% off, and they're doing it on the fly, what they want to do is they want to take the power away from you. And the power is whoever's got the money. So if you're buying something for the government and you're the one that has the money, the person that is selling that product, they want that. As soon as they get that money, you have lost the ability to negotiate with them. So they don't care what the product you're going to get is. They just want you to give them, if you can get a 10% discount off, then they've got the power. They're out of there, and you're stuck with an inferior product, which is why you always make sure and thoroughly inspect and review everything you buy prior to paying for it. That's one of the main ways to avoid product or service substitution. Supporting document. The other two real quick, Lori. Okay. Supporting documentation like compliance certificates may appear altered, and the contractor may falsify the testing. doing it himself and not doing it, or having a related company do it. So a lot of times with government products, they require that there's a certification of compliance that'll meet their standards. And if they're providing a substitute product that doesn't meet those standards, they will simply falsify that document. And as far as testing goes, unless the government entity is sitting there staring at them, watching them test it, then they have to be concerned. The contractor should not be doing the testing of the products they're reselling us, and the company that is shouldn't be related to the contractor.
I'm going to move on to the next one, John. We are getting close to time, so we'll get moving through these.
I will. I'm sorry. I talked too long about it. It's such an exciting topic, as I'm sure you were all aware. So preventing procurement fraud. This is probably the most important aspect of this. So, and this goes with almost every different thing. So what you're looking for is very good internal controls. And internal controls are, they are making sure that everybody is looking at signatures on documents. If you sign something, you're responsible that it's right. So get signatures on documents. Have somebody looking at things. But where it really starts is up front, making sure that you're contracting with people that are reputable. So do your due diligence. Check into their background. You've got the internet, you're already on the internet all day, I know. So go in there and look up vendor payment addresses when they say, please set up a new vendor. This is the address I want to go to. Look up their ACH wire information by going online. Typically, they'll have their ACH wire information there and available. If not, go online, find the person to call, and call them. Look them up on the Better Business Bureau. And I mean, there's every different company out there that there are tons of them that give good, honest reviews of companies. And so use those to guarantee that you are establishing a relationship with a reputable vendor. That's going to cut out a lot of your fraud right there. And then, as we said before, independently confirming and changing payment remittance addresses and things like that. For that, you need to do your independent confirmation. But I mentioned collusion. So, and I know we only have 5 minutes left here, and we're going to miss some of this presentation, but this is an important point. So if you can keep fraud to one person, then you have if they can do everything that's necessary to commit fraud, you've got a problem. If instead someone has to collude with someone else to commit fraud, you have put in at least one block. One person alone can't commit fraud if you do the right things. And that's a separation of duties and approvals. So you've got vendor setup and update an accounting system. That is a function. You need to keep that separate from the person who actually requests the goods or services from the vendor. So that somebody that's actually purchasing something from a vendor is different from the person that sets up the vendor. Then you have somebody in receiving. Somebody that receives the goods should take the purchase order, and they should look at the purchase order and look at the goods and say, yes, this vendor actually is established and sent us what we asked for. And then you've got the invoice payment approval. So now you've got an invoice and you've got a purchase order, and somebody has signed off on each one of those and looked at them and said, what's on the purchase order matches the receiving report, matches the invoice. We got what we paid for. We can pay this. And then you have a separate person writing the check. That's independent separation of duties. And what the problem is if you don't have that, then you have somebody setting up a fictitious vendor in accounts payable, then they're responsible for purchasing, and they place an order with that vendor because they're able to do that. And then there's nobody in receiving to check that they get the product. And it doesn't matter because they're not going to be getting a product anyway. It's a fictitious invoice. Then the same person approves the payment and writes the check. You're guaranteed you're going to have fraud. So the more of these that you can separate, the better. And so that kind of takes care of the second issue. And the third thing I would say on the last page is do independent reviews of check runs. So if people know that you are looking, that is a fraud prevention. Because if they don't know that you're looking for fraud, people are going to try to commit fraud. Go ahead, Lori. So train your employees on ethics. If you train them on ethics, it's two things. One, they know how to be ethical if they didn't before. But two, they know that your company or this government entity is taking this very, very seriously. And if they know you're taking it seriously, they know you're probably going to catch them in whatever they're doing. Then establishing a fraud reporting hotline. Make it easy for people if they uncover fraud and they don't want to go, it may be their immediate manager that's doing the fraud, or it may be their coworker. They don't want to go with inside their little niche department. They need to go somewhere way outside of where they are and report this so that they don't get reprimanded. Because if they report it to their manager and their coworker who is colluding on this, well, then you've got a problem. And then auditing your vendor files regularly. This is where data analytics comes in.
So as John was saying, using data analytics to audit the vendor file. That's where you can look for name changes. You can compare before and after, irregular payments, checking addresses to see if there's commonality amongst the various vendors or employees. There should not be, in most instances, the same address being used. So as John said, that's where you can use data analytics in these purposes. Common employee expense reimbursement schemes, overstating expenses, inflating the cost. Make sure you have documentation supporting the expenses that supports the meal and expense. Duplication of expenses, so tracking what they've submitted beforehand and what's being submitted now. Looking to see the nature of the expense. Is it a personal expense? Is it a business expense? And questioning it if it's not provided in clarity, or falsifying receipts. Again, preventing it, similar to what you've seen before. Develop policies, have procedures. Segregations of duties, very important in this process, just as John has mentioned. Do audits, same thing on the employee expenses, just as John mentioned on the vendors. Use data and analytics for technology, and monitor the expense reimbursement activities. So we're going to skip over this case example because I know we're limited on time. So we're going to go to our last polling question to make sure you all get credit. And the polling question is, would you like for a team member to reach out to you after today's webinar? Yes, maybe in the future, or no? I'm going to turn it back over to Christian. We really appreciate y'all's time today.
I was going to say, I'll go ahead and jump in. And thank you both very much. The one thing that I would encourage everybody to do is feel free to reach out to Lori or to John. Feel free to reach out to me. I will tell you that unfortunately, I ran into some of this when I was in office, where discovered people doing some things they shouldn't be, and fortunately we found out and were able to connect with the right authorities to take care of it. But these things happen, and there's a lot of material here. And I said at the beginning, we're a firm that doesn't mind running into the fire. But the other thing is, the public sector is really the core of our business. So if you have questions, if you just have thoughts, if you want to run something by us, have questions, just feel free to reach out, and we're happy to give you that feedback or some ideas of what you might be looking at or some approaches you may want to take. So with that, this does conclude our fourth session. And thanks again for joining us. Like I said, if you have any questions, reach out. We do value your feedback on all these. So ask you to take part in the survey when this is over. That's how we program for next year and other webinars we do throughout the year that many of you do attend. And then just as a reminder, the registration site is linked in the chat for the next sessions tomorrow. Recordings will be available in about a week. And the next one and the last one of the day starts in about 10 minutes and on data analytics and the art of the possible. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.